Welcome back to Crafting a Meaningful Life. I know I say this every week, but I have a great guest for you today, and it's one that I think so many of you are going to love. Sara Stibitz is with us today, and I haven't obviously talked to all my listeners, but I have talked to a lot of you or texted you or connected on social media with so many of you over the last 8 years. And the one thing I know is that almost all of you have a story, and tons of you have thought, like, you wrote a book, Mary. I'm thinking about writing a book. I have a story to tell. Well, I know you do, and that's why we're doing this podcast today. I have the ultimate person who's going to help you tell your story. So, Sara, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Mary.
This is going to be a fun podcast because the moment I said it's going to help you publish a book, I had either a third of my listeners turn off, or I had all of them say, someday I may publish my own story. How do you think someone knows if writing a book is in their future?
Mm. Yeah, that's a really good question. um, so what I notice with people who not only so lots of people want to write a book, right? Lots of
Yeah,
people decide to write a book or they say one day I'll write a book. But we know that most people don't end up
yeah,
doing it,
yeah.
right? It's almost impossible to tell how many either internally or even externally express that they want to write a book and how many actually do it, right? I've heard statistics like 1% actually do it, but I don't know how they're measuring that. But if we could
Yeah,
imagine that maybe there's a thread of truth in that, right? That 1% of people actually do the job to get the book done. That's not very many, right? Um, and so when I think of like what is it that how does someone know that they want to write a book and how do they finally get to that place where they actually do it? I think it's the people who heard that calling at some point in their life, maybe when they're children, maybe when they're adults after a big event, and they feel the need to externalize something, whether it's
mm,
something that they've learned, like their wisdom through their professional experience or their career, or the wisdom that they've earned through difficult life events. Right, they've got this need to tell it and get it out. Um, and I think also there should be a difference between how we talk about people who write their story and share it, and how we talk about people who write a book and publish it. They're not always the
they're not
same,
always the same. Yes.
right? And they both have deep meaning, and one is not less meaningful than the other. But the book is like this, hey, you've gone this final step to turn it into a product that you sell in a bookstore or on Amazon, or from your website, however it is that you do it.
Yeah.
So when people think about what it is that gets them to that finish line and who it is that wants to write a book, I really think everyone has you hinted at the beginning, everyone has a story.
Yeah.
There's always a story to tell. It's just, do you have a story that you need to write? Do you have a story that you need to express? Maybe you have to tell it. Maybe verbal storytelling is the way that you need to tell it. Or do you have a story that needs to be written into a book form and pushed out into the world? And those are the questions I ask clients when they come to me and say that they'd like to write a book.
Yeah. I can tell you the reasons not to write a book.
Right.
I'm very good at that. Like, you don't write a book because you want to make your first million.
Yeah.
You don't
Yes.
write a book because you want the world to know how fabulous you are.
Right. Oh,
Those
yes.
are the two big ones that I see people, and I'm like, wait, first of all, on your first book, unless you're Michelle Obama, you're not
Right.
gonna. Yeah. It's just like I remember the first time I sent my copy to a publisher, and she wrote back and she said, "Mary, this is an autobiography.
Hmm.
And you're not Michelle Obama, so no one cares."
Mm,
And that was really hard for me to hear, but also a huge learning step for me.
yeah.
And then I rewrote with the view in mind of this is my story, yes, to illustrate these principles, which are now my light posts along the way. And it became
Yeah,
more about the guide and the light posts than about my story. So
right.
how do people approach writing a book when they first start out? I mean, what does that look like even?
Yeah, so there's a lot of ways to answer that question, but I'm gonna riff on a
Okay.
specifically what you said, which is that, um, you first wrote a book that was probably very cathartic, right? You
Yeah.
needed to get your story, right? You needed to get the story out, you needed to tell it, and what you shared was probably one of the not that you didn't revise, but probably an early draft. It was
Right.
as you wrote it, okay? And how that's an important step, especially when it's your story or it's anything related to memoir, even professionally. It's important to have a step where you acknowledge, I actually just need to get this out. I need to just say it. And some people, that's where they stop, right? It's that difference between storytelling and book writing. So when we think about how you went and then changed it, right? What you did
Yeah.
after that harsh feedback, it was a little harsh, but
It was a little
accurate,
harsh.
right?
Yeah, I'm not
Yeah,
Michelle Obama. Okay, girl.
right, right. But what she was pointing to is like this book is about you, and nobody has is invested in who you are right now. So the you have to shift the book to being about them. And that's the crucial step, is
Yeah.
that you went back to your version and you said, okay, I've written my cathartic version and that's done now. I now need to think of an audience and I need to probably define a specific audience that I want to reach or touch. And this version has to be rewritten to actually speak to that person. And that's the difference
Mm,
between the cathartic, like, let me get this out, to, hey, I'm making something that is useful for other people.
uh,
And I think the big piece here is people think they're just gonna go from, like, one to the second one, and often they need that cathartic step before they're gonna get anywhere with, reaching an audience, helping people, turning their life's wisdom into principles that can be used in action. So when
uh,
it comes to approaching a book and you've got a story to tell, you've got a memoir, right? We've got to remember that there's stages to this. One of those stages is often that cathartic stage, and only then, when you've got the raw material, is it usually that people can go ahead and say, okay, how do I work with this now to make it
yeah.
something that's beyond me?
Right. I think that
Yeah.
for me, what that one thing that you just said was such a tool for me to help me
Hmm.
define my audience. Who is this? And she had asked me that question, and I wrote back, well, it's for everyone.
Which is so common. It's so
Yeah,
common.
yeah, well,
Yes.
everyone
Yeah.
will wanna read this book, right? But
Right.
then in retrospect to think, well, who I'm like, I really think my audience is primarily female, okay,
Yeah.
which is reflective of my podcast. I'm 85% women. Bless you,
Yeah.
you 15% men, not to belittle you, I just love you, but it's 85% women. And then
Yeah.
just like in my podcast, they're usually professional women who wonder, what is the deeper meaning of this life? And where am
Hmm.
I going? And then to take a look beyond that and saying, it's someone who's looking for a shift, someone who's looking for a roadmap to change.
Hmm.
And as I really began to hone that down, it helped me with my book. That's such an excellent tip for people to define their audience and not just
Yeah.
think, isn't the world ready to read my story?
Right. Yeah, and that is so it's super common for people to approach and say, like, "Everyone's gonna wanna read it. What do you
Yeah,
mean?"
right. You're talking about.
And right. And whether you're trying to self-publish or traditionally publish or go through an indie publisher, all of them will ask you who your audience is. They're
Yeah,
all thinking in terms of, who is this book for and why are they going to care?
right,
What is it going to do for them? And those are the questions they want you to be able to answer before they're going to take the work seriously. And so defining that audience, even, at the cathartic step, it's not the right time to think about audience. It really isn't. That time it's time to think about you and your
just
expression. and what you need to say, what you need to get off your chest. It's really only after that that it makes sense to start thinking about who might this help. And often it is people who are not that dissimilar from you. It's often people who are maybe a few steps back on the path, just a little bit behind you, who need the advice that you have to give, right? And but the overarching point here is like in the cathartic stage, don't burden yourself with audience, but
Right.
understand that it won't be everyone, right? And only after you've got that piece out of out of your system, then you go back and say, okay, who might I be able to help with this?
Mhm. Such wise words, Sarah. I think that in and of itself is worth people listening to this podcast just to hear that and that natural flow of how things work. One of the things, and of course, I want to tell my audience right now, at the end of the podcast, as always, we've included Sarah's links to where to buy her book, Writing with Purpose, and then her website and social media links, because you're going to want to look at actually a little bit more meat on Sarah than just what we can cover in the podcast. So, as I read on your website, Sarah, the one thing that struck me that was very different from other people I've either interviewed or known personally who do what you do, help people write a book and publish, is that for you, there was a second step which just struck me in the face. And it's everyone has a story. Okay, we got that. Everyone wants to help, write their story. There's that part. But then you went on to say that the part you loved the most was helping people discover the deeper self, that through their story that they understood more of what was inside and their why of life. Just spill out to all of us what you mean by that.
Yeah. So I will say that writing a book or even just writing your story is a transformative process.
Yeah.
When people come into this work and they take it seriously and they set their goals and intentions, whatever that looks like, whether it's having something to publish or having something in writing outside of you, and then they undertake the work earnestly and with real attention and focus, it is amazing to see what happens when people put themselves through this and change, right? They learn something, they release things, they have understanding they didn't have before. There's just something about externalizing, especially a very personal story, that really shifts the way that you look at it. But I'll say that's also true for professional work as well. So
Mm.
many professionals haven't had that opportunity to really reflect on what is it that I have learned and what is it that I know that maybe other people don't know, right? Or that I haven't ever been able to crystallize. And so the writing process is transformative no matter which project you're trying to undertake
Yeah.
because it gives you that time to crystallize knowledge and wisdom that maybe you've never been able to say or express. And you've never had the room or space to do that. So that's one piece of it. Just the process from
Mhm.
beginning to end itself is very transformative. But what I will also say is that, especially with personal stories, it's really interesting to me how people will, not see the meaning that they made of the stories of their lives or the meaning that they could make, right? And I say this like
Mm.
we all have really hard experiences. We all have hard life traumas, memories, things like that. And it's very interesting when I'm helping someone through memoir or writing a personal story, how often they sort of skate over what that meant for them or
Ah.
how it rippled out into the rest of their life and even their current life. Um, so for example, I was in a workshop, I was leading a workshop with a young man who um, very openly shared a boatload of trauma. And then we're talking familial betrayal,
Uh.
sexual abuse, all kinds of things. And he just rattled it off and told it as if it was a joke. And that's how he approaches that story is, well, it's sort of funny, because it's his viewpoint was it's so crazy that it's sort of funny. And you can see that this is the way he coped with all of that.
Yes.
And yet when I yep, that's how he made sense of it, right? But it was no longer helping him. Like, it worked for a little while, but that method is rotting now. He needs a new method and a new way to deal with the story. And so as we worked together, we started to uncover and just even reflecting back to him, like, let me tell you the themes that I hear. I'm not even going to touch what you just shared in terms of literal events, but what I hear is all of these emotional pieces. And
Yeah.
just that reflection helped him to start to look at it just in a different way and to take it a little more seriously and to start to see, oh, okay, there's a lot for me to unpack here.
Yeah.
And yeah, and
Wow.
too often, I look at it in three layers, right? So we have events, which is like, this happened on Thursday afternoon, right? Very like, this is the setting. I was at home. This is the person who was there, da da da. Then we have the next layer, which is the emotions. And you'd be surprised how many people just stop at events, right? They'll even skate over emotions. Like, what did you
Mm.
feel? Well, what did you feel after that? And after that? And what did you feel over the next few months after that, life-changing event happened? And sometimes it's the first time they've ever reflected on these things. And then we go to the
Right.
next layer, which is like, okay, so you had this event, these feelings. What did you make it mean? And how can we see that playing out through your life? And then they get to decide, do they want to write that? Do they want to write that meaning? Or are they in a position now, do I want to reconsider the meaning that I've made from this and write from that position? So it's very much client led in this way, but it's amazing to me how few
Mm.
people have had the chance or the space to really look at the meaning in the lives that they've lived and how it's affecting them. And my hope is always, like, at the end of that kind of a process, that they have rewritten some kind of meaning in a way that is far more constructive for them or supportive, in which they get healing or closure, something where they're moving on from that, with less baggage, with less ties or weight to it.
Yeah. That is exactly how the process we'd like to see it work, that it
Yeah.
really transforms our lives. The second time, well, actually, in the third revision, my book, that was where
Yeah.
I was, is that this has transformed my life. I'm
Mhm.
already in this good space.
Yeah.
So what is the reason then for actually pursuing and writing and rewriting the book?
Yeah.
And that when you can see that your lessons are really the same as everyone else's. I
Mhm.
I think that realization that, "You mean I wasn't the only one that ever felt this? You mean
Yeah.
other people were bullied in school? What are you talking about?" You know what I mean? That kind of realizing, so even though we're not unique in our stories, we're oftentimes unique then in the lessons we glean from them and how we run the rest of our life based on
Right.
what we have learned.
Yeah.
That for me was the best part about writing.
Yeah.
And so once you've helped someone write this book and go through this really cathartic experience and then understanding the meaning, and I loved what you said about what they how they were dealing with those stories, like just using them as matter of fact or laughing or,
Mhm.
you know, to give people commonality with them.
Mhm.
Sometimes I see that. And then stepping into something new.
Right.
At what point then would you say my work here is done? Or do you go on to actually help them publish the book and to find publishers? Because I don't think you are a publisher. You help people find publishers then?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think about it in two ways. Some people, as we said, are writing because they want to write something for themselves and they don't necessarily need the help publishing, right? I
Right.
have a client who wrote a full length manuscript with my support, and it's just for his kids. So he doesn't need to go through um,
Mhm.
the rigmarole of finding a publisher, right? I have people who write pieces that they want to share either on their Substack or in some other way that it's maybe it's just for them, or they use it professionally, or they use it in some other way, but they don't need a book. But I do help people actually move towards publishing, and I work with both people who are on the self-publishing side and people who are on the traditional publishing side. Um, as I said, so there's that cathartic part, and once you're done with that piece and you've got something that you want to
Yeah.
start building into something else for that's a product, that's when we start thinking about, okay, who is the audience? Where are we able to define it? And do we understand that market? And do we understand the comparables? That's a huge piece, right? Do we understand if you want to write a book about spiritual transformation or professional transformation, what are the other books that you would be competing with? Or to put it another way, if you were to see your book in a bookstore, who would be on the shelf next to you?
Yes.
Right? And do you understand those books and what they offer or fail to offer? Right? So where your book sits in
Mhm.
that market. And
Mm.
we start thinking through, like, does this concept, are you solving a problem, and what is the problem and what is the solution? Or can we say that really clearly? And so we start building in all those pieces that are sort of foundational to positioning, to marketing, and to writing the book, even if the book is mostly written, right? But we've got those foundational pieces. Um, and I think, and to be clear, that happens whether you're traditionally or self-publishing, right? You need to have thought through
Right.
those pieces. Yeah. And then from there, it's, how do people think about publishing? I have people who come to me with some really old school ideas of what's going to happen when they go shop their book around, right? And I think you kind of touched on
Yeah.
some of them earlier, right? So people still believe in the fantasy of the huge advance
Yeah.
that they're
Yeah.
going to get, and they're convinced it's going to be six figures. And the truth is, top 3%, I think it is. Top 3% of advances are over six figures, and the vast majority are, something like under 15,000, and often publishers, especially indie publishers, are not gonna offer an advance,
Right.
right?
Right.
And so first, a lot of my work in helping people get published one way or the other is to help them understand the reality of the market as opposed to the fantasy that they're coming.
Yep.
So we talk through, like, look, it's unless you have a huge social media following and you've built up a platform, you're very unlikely to get an advance of the size that you're imagining, right? And then the next thing we have to talk about is the fallacy of marketing, right? Everyone believes they're going to market for me. And this is the most difficult thing
Yeah.
to shift for people because, of course, why wouldn't they? And the truth is, they are expecting you to do the majority
Yeah.
of the marketing. Yeah. And the hard thing is they won't ever tell you that. And they'll tell you, well, the marketing team will do this, the marketing team will do that. But if you try to say, please write down for me everything you plan to do for this book, I've never seen it done.
Yeah.
And because they don't want to commit.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of reasons for that that we could go on for hours, right? So a lot of helping someone decide how to publish is first resetting expectations around what's actually out here in the world and what's available to you right now, or if you want to wait 2 to 3 years, and then helping them decide what works. And for a lot of authors, self-publishing is a more viable path because it's
Yeah.
fully in your control. You're not waiting for a gatekeeper to approve of you, and you get to set the parameters, the price, the cover, the design, the interior. I mean, all of it is up to you. Which is, both a boon and a curse, depending on how well you manage to pull all these pieces together. But yeah, so when I help people publish, it's often in the scope of, like, how do we connect? If we're doing traditional publishing, how do we write your proposal? Who is the best agent for you to meet with? When I help people with self-publishing, that's a little bit of a different path. So it's like, all right, are we doing book coaching so that I can help you keep on track? Since you're not going to have an external deadline with a traditional publisher, do I do your editing for you? Since you're not going to have an editor, you got to
Right.
hire an editor, right? So those are the kinds of ways that I support, both in the
So
conceptual piece, the
you do
path, and then
editing?
yeah, hmm
Oh, okay. That's
yeah,
another big piece. Yeah, I had to hire an
huge
editor.
piece.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's huge. So
yeah,
you kind of followed the process all the way through. I remember the first time I talked to a publisher and they were asking me all things like, how many do you have followers on LinkedIn and social media,
yeah,
blah, blah, blah. What's your contact base? And finally I said, well, how many books do you expect me to sell? And they
yeah,
said, we don't have any expectation on the top number that you sell, but we have a huge expectation on the bottom number that you sell.
yeah,
I'm like, okay, well, just for kicks and giggles, do you wanna share with me what that number is? You know? And they said 3,500.
yeah,
I was like, "Are you kidding me? 3,500, I'll do that overnight. What are you talking about?" And they're like, I know that people think that. It's a huge
yeah,
wake-up call to realize the number of people that actually slide in and can sell a minimum of 3,500 books, and I'm like, that's not even an issue for me. I got that sold, like, tomorrow. And I said, I have 13,000 people on LinkedIn that are my close friends." And she said, "Okay, okay. So what percentage do you think will buy?" I said, "Well, I mean, at least 10% right there. That's 1,300." And she said, "Can I tell you the figure is 1%?"
right,
"You mean of all the people that know me on LinkedIn, only 130 people want my book?" She said, "Yeah."
yeah,
Um, and then you start to get a realistic
right,
idea of how many books will I sell?
yeah.
How do you help people get a visualization of, is it going to be possible to sell their book?
Yeah. I think your experience, I love that you shared your experience, and I love that you had the confidence, but you're also a born saleswoman, I think. I think you're probably very good, right?
Yeah,
But the truth yeah, I think that's true, but, the truth is most people are not, and the statistics there and I wish I was better at, like, rattling off numbers, but you can easily find, like, what percentage of books ever sell more than 500, and it is a
yeah,
dismally low, okay? Really, really low. And that's self-published or traditional. There was a huge trial a couple of years ago with Simon and Schuster, and all of this data and information came out, and it was so clear that publishing is basically a gamble, right?
yeah,
Most of the books they buy do not make them money, and they lose money on them. And what they're banking on is the one or two per year that really, shoot for the stars,
yeah,
and the rest are a loss. And so we have to understand, like, it is much harder to sell a book than we think. And that, so I love that she said 1%. Sometimes we think about, well, the typical conversion rate is somewhere between somewhere around 3%, but one is probably even healthier to, let's say, like,
She
listen,
it
you can't even count on 3% of
I
your
felt like she
followers.
just reached through the screen to me and just slapped me in the face
Yeah.
and just said, "Wake up,
She
Mary."
probably did. Yeah, and I think what's even harder to say, right? I worked with, a woman who founded a major makeup label, one that we would all recognize, and she had millions of social media followers,
Right?
but talking about her how you were gonna think about her conversion rate with millions of followers, we don't know if they're even readers. They're not there
Yeah,
to read her content. They're there to see her beautiful face and to see her makeup looks. And that's what they're there for. That doesn't mean that they're readers or want to read a 60,000 word book
yeah,
about her stories, right? And so even that, it's hard to say, well, she's got millions of followers. Well, you know what? I could be the numbers could be dismal on that one.
yeah,
So how I walk people through it, honestly, it's a lot of like bubble popping, and I try to like bring them up at the end of this first call where we're popping bubbles, but it's a lot of that. Like, listen, let's reacquaint ourselves with the reality of the market. But here's what you still can do, and it's not a bad thing. It just means you're taking more control into your own
yeah,
hands. And for the people who actually do have a really healthy following and have done the work, they still might wanna do it, but I've had enough of them choose self-publishing anyway because they don't wanna give up creative control.
right.
They don't wanna give up pricing control. They don't wanna work on someone else's timeline. Um, yeah, so it's a lot of Like, let me reacquaint you with what is happening in the world right now. And I think the hard part is, I have, relationships with agents that I refer to, and a lot of them say to me, "I don't want you to send anyone who has less than 250,000 followers."
Yeah.
And it's like, so I'll say that. I'll say, like,
Yeah.
"Look, this is the reality." There are some agents who will work with less. That's fine, but that's not the majority at this point because unfortunately in the traditional publishing world, they want demonstrated sales success prior to making that gamble that we discussed earlier. And the
Yeah.
only way to ascertain demonstrated sales success is to look at how are you selling yourself online right now? And that's how they're
Right.
going to gauge it. Yeah.
That is such good advice and such a good way to look at that. And I thought, okay, well, the one thing that I have that other people don't have, I mean, you're always trying to be the exception to the rule, is I do public speaking. I do inspirational speaking. I mean, I walk into a room of 500 people and, I was half of them want to take my book home. Well, now having done that, you know, for 5 years, I realized that even those numbers, when they've had a one-on-one, face-to-face experience with you, that you have maybe 10% of those people then who
Yeah.
want to actually go and lay down money and buy your book. And so let's talk about that piece now.
Sure.
What I discovered was that selling a written book where people have a tangible book in their hands is not the deal. And when Amazon finally reached out to me, asked me if I was going to do an Audible, I was like, "Oh, no. No, I have my written book. What are you talking about?" And they said, "Do you realize that 80% of our book sales are?" I'm like,
Yeah.
"Oh." And so in the end, I did do Audible. What do you recommend and how do you talk to people about that? And do
Yeah.
you want
I
them to
think,
read it or do you want to hire someone to read it?
oh, good question. So I think Audible, it's interesting to think about who who listens to an Audible book as opposed to who reads the book, right?
Right.
So I'll start with that latter group. Who reads the book? Writers and readers are a very specific group of people. And we all think, most of us think, that everyone reads, and maybe not everyone writes, but everyone wants to write. Okay, we all think everyone reads or loves books or buys books or has books in their home. I mean, for those who can't see
Right.
me, right, I have a
You
giant bookshelf
she's
behind
got
me.
the library behind her, guys.
Yeah, right. And so we tend to operate in this world like everyone is interested in reading the book. Why wouldn't you want the physical book? But the truth is only 15% of people are actually readers, right?
Yeah.
There's a startlingly high amount of people that never touch a book again after high school. And so, it's actually a really specific audience, right? And so those are the folks who are going to want that tangible book. And what Audible did, and for years, I think the publishing industry just kind of poo-pooed it until it was the most consistently growing
Yeah.
vertical in the publishing industry year over year, and I think it's still growing.
Yeah.
Um, because it's actually unlocking a different audience. It's unlocking an audience that isn't going to sit and read a book because they don't value books in the same way. Maybe they don't even identify as a reader. Maybe they're listening to this book because they want to learn something or they can't read. I know people who are dyslexic. They love
Yeah.
reading, quote unquote, but they cannot sit and read a book. Or I have people who, they have ADHD. Their focus isn't good, but they can hear something while they're doing something else. And
Yeah.
so Audible unlocks a completely different audience. When I think of who listens to an Audible versus who reads, it's the readers who read. It's the people who are active or have some other motivation for reading that book that are going to listen to it. And
Mhm.
as you said, like huge numbers of people listen to it. So I do think it is important to have an Audible book. I just released my book in February, and I have not done the recording. I'm actually in the conversation now to do the recording, and
Are you gonna read it
I'm
yourself or are you gonna have
yes. So
okay.
getting to that, right? I've had people tell me, I have lots of people and colleagues in the book industry who are like, never read it yourself. And I've said, why? And they're like, well, because you're
Yeah.
not a professional. It's not going to sound good, da da da. But I have other people who are like, look, you're a pleasant person. Your voice is going to come through, your personality. Like, as long as you don't read it flatly, right? I do think there's a minimum amount of practice and
Right.
preparation you need to have for this. So I'm on the fence, Mary, and I think I'm leaning. So then there's a third option too now, which we have to talk about. There are places where you can go upload some samples of your voice, and then
Ah,
the AI will create the audio files for you, which will you then still have to turn into an audio book. And I am deeply on the fence on that, as well
mm,
as much as I do think we need to adapt and learn to work with AI as writers and just as people in general. I'm not sure I love that idea. And so right now, I'm leaning towards reading it myself because I want the experience of putting it into this medium. And I want the experience of having to learn how to read well and how to produce an audiobook, since many of my
mhm.
clients also need to do that.
Yeah, yeah.
So I have a motivation outside of that, but I do think like there's value in the warmth of you, the creator, reading out that story. So that's where I sit right now. But you know what? That my viewpoint could change in a year.
Well, you've been on the podcast long enough with me now to know that I'm a fairly animated person. I have a lot of
Yes.
voice fluctuations. I can tell a story. I'm the best
Yeah.
storyteller I know. So, my audio guy said, "You can read this yourself. And in
Yes.
fact, you should read this yourself." Because people want to hear your voice. They're used to hearing you when you do clips on your social media, when you speak, they want to hear you. I'm like, damn straight they do. They want to hear me, and I'm going to use my voice. And I
Yeah.
went in, I did the recording, over a series of, I think I went in over a series of 5 days and just did, some each day. And he kept saying, "Oh, you're doing such a great job." Afterwards, I've had second thoughts, Sarah. And the
Hmm.
reason is because your book is a book, not necessarily your story.
Yeah.
My book was 100% my story, with the purpose and the things of behind it, the steps to leading a more meaningful life. And so when I would tell the story, there were times it was too emotional for me.
Oh, yeah.
And I allowed too much of that to come through.
Hmm.
And those moments where I have to kind of take a breath to even be able to continue on. And in retrospect, I wished I hadn't have.
Hmm.
But once again, the guy that recorded it said, "Mary, if someone else had read it for you, those wouldn't be in there at all."
Right.
So I think deciding what's best for you is probably one of the most important decisions about publishing. It's the hardest
Right.
piece.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. But that it's so interesting because your voice is very beautiful. You have very good pacing, and you're right. You know how to modulate and go up and down. You're not flat, you're expressive. And so I'll say this, and you've been doing this for years, but I had a podcast for a brief amount of time. And the hardest thing for me to get used to in terms of editing and reviewing, I could not stand listening to my voice.
Oh, yeah, no one can.
I
Yeah,
Oh
yes,
my God, I don't
yeah.
know. I it was just I would get a couple seconds in, I'd be like, "I gotta stop, I can't." And I got through it enough, right? But it took a long time before I could just be with whatever I'm saying. And so there's a way that we react to our voice, even though we
Yep,
move past that, that is going to be so different. I just imagine someone hearing your audiobook and hearing that emotion, that real emotion, and they may already be experiencing it, feeling it, and then they can hear yours. It's just a
mm.
different, like, to me, that's very beautiful, even if for you, it feels maybe a little vulnerable, maybe a little more vulnerable than you want, that or than you would decide, than you would choose, right?
I'm a very vulnerable person.
Mm,
I will oftentimes do Q&A with people, and they know they can ask me anything. There isn't any question that I wouldn't ask, because my message to people is that vulnerability is the most beautiful gift you can give yourself and others. And if I preach that, I darn well better be willing to show my emotions.
mm,
And I am. It was just that I didn't know if people could hear past the emotion. It
Yeah.
wa but you're in a good, company with people. No one likes to hear their voice. They think they sound different. And
I
even now,
know.
after all these podcasts, I had a cooking show for 13 years on PBS, for crying out loud. I never watched one episode because I always thought, "Okay, if I watch and that's how I sound, I'm never gonna record again. I'm done. I'm out of here." Do you know what I mean? But you
Yeah.
have to get past that, and
Right.
I would encourage you, this is me talking to you now, I would encourage you to record your own. You have what it takes.
Mm.
Not
Oh,
everyone
thank you.
does. And after listening and after doing well over 400 podcasts, you you can.
Thank you. So
Absolutely.
I will do it, and then I will report back to you how
Yes,
it goes.
yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes. And let me know. Now we're gonna include all those links at the end of the podcast for Sarah, and when we actually she decides to add her Audible one, we will come back and add that link as well
Yeah.
so that you can include that. Let's see, you do you have a copy of your book with you right now?
Yes, I do.
Let's see. There we go.
Writing on
Writing on
purpose.
Purpose. Tell me about the title. What do you
Yeah.
what
So
emotions do you hope that brings to people?
writing on purpose. Well, it's sort of like a couple different meanings, right? Um, and I'll say this over, I've been in business for 13 years. I've helped people who are writing deeply meaningful books. And I've also helped people who are just writing a book just for their business and it doesn't have much meaning or even a purpose beyond, making money. And listen, all motives are okay.
Yeah,
Um, but I prefer and love working with people who have a purpose that goes beyond them or their own benefit.
absolutely.
Um, and I think that's where the best work is done too. I don't see long lasting, moving books coming from those who just have the single motivation of creating a lead magnet or, making something that's going to benefit them financially. The best books really are somehow taking something personal, whether that's your knowledge or your story, and making it for someone else so that they can derive something from it. And so when I say writing on purpose, it's for me, it's let's write things that have purpose to them, that have
Mhm.
meaning and depth to them. And then, it's writing on purpose, an essential guide to writing a book that matters. It's also that, like, I think one thing that goes unsaid is that when we are trying to write a book that lasts, what we're maybe aiming for a flavor of is immortality, right? When we imagine maybe my book will still be around after I'm gone, like that's what
The
we're
Library
talking
of
about.
Congress is gonna have a copy of this.
Yes. Exactly, right? And so when we think about writing a book that matters, that takes some care and some thought and some planning, right? It's quite a lot of work actually that goes into it. People just don't just write perennial sellers overnight by sitting down in a flash of inspiration. Maybe they write
Yeah.
the bulk of the text, but the book itself takes a lot of planning to make something that will impact people and last beyond its years.
Mhm. You know, I didn't even think about this when I was writing I wrote my book during COVID.
Mm,
So, it was, for me, the perfect time to slow down and take time to do this because I'd been in my mind for several years and hadn't done it, but COVID forced me to just like, "Okay, here I am at home." That's it.
yeah. It did
And
that for a lot of people. Yeah.
yeah, a lot of books came out after
Yeah.
COVID, but,
Yeah.
uh, it didn't dawn on me, and now I look back and I think, that was rather arrogant of myself to think that I didn't read a book about writing or the purpose and help me walk through all of these things before I wrote my book. It seems like a no-brainer now. I would I wish I had read your book before I put pen to paper. Yeah.
That's very sweet. And I will say there's a piece in my book where I say, listen, reading books about writing is not writing.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's right.
Thinking about writing is not writing. Even outlining your book is not writing. And so as much as I totally appreciate your retrospective on here's what I would do differently, you still wrote the book. And, referring to our earlier conversation about how many people want to and never get to that place. Like you still sat
Yeah.
down and you got it done, and then you went out and you
And I did
championed it.
sell my at least 3,500 copies.
Yep, and you did sell, like, you did it. So
Yeah.
I wouldn't be too hard on yourself on that. I'd say you definitely successfully navigated this arena.
But my advice to people would be to first start with a book such as yours about writing on purpose. That is so great. And even just going to your website, I think will, as a writer getting ready to publish a book, the emotion that I felt as I went to your website, and your website's not that long. You know, you start off and you have that little blurb about what you do and your why. I felt embraced.
Mm.
I felt seen. And I thought, wow, if I were to ever write another book, which I think I will, if I were to ever write another book, I would absolutely call Sara. Just from
That's
reading
very
your
sweet.
website. That's before I met you today,
Well,
because I
thank you.
felt seen and embraced before I ever met you, that you would get me and you would have the best advice for me. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Well, that's beautiful that I managed to convey that through a website, so I
Right?
appreciate that. Yeah.
Yeah. Just it's phenomenal. Well, it's what we all want to do with our books.
Right. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Sara, thank you for coming on today and sharing some of these little tidbits of wisdom, and then kind of not just the tidbits, but how you look at an overall plan to moving you from point A to point B and deciding what those points are.
Mhm.
Wow, that's such a great assistance to people who want to dream and who want to write and want to share their story. Mm. Thanks
Well,
for
thank
being
you for
with us.
having me. Yeah, thank you for having me on on your podcast, and thank you for being such a generous host.
Well, you're wonderful, and I hope all of you who are listening, if there's that glimmer in your mind, when I was young, I certainly didn't ever think about writing a book. But by the time I got in my 50s, I knew that there was a book inside of me. And when I published my first book, I thought there were 5 books inside of me. But then after having done that, I'm like, oh, no, there's just one more.
Yeah, yeah, that's
And
how it usually goes.
when I climbed Kilimanjaro at age 65, I was always going to wear heels up on the summit so that I could say the title of my last book is "And She Did It All in Heels." But when I got up there, I was so cold. I didn't even think about putting those shoes on. They stayed in my backpack.
I love
Oh,
that. Great
uh,
story.
so many different things we have to talk about. And so, Sara, when you do your audio and when I decide to publish again, I'd love to have you come back on the podcast and we can just share with people my process and how, where I am on that and how you're helping me walk through that. I would love
Yep,
that.
that would be amazing. Let's
It
plan on
would
it.
be. Let's plan on it. Let's do it. All right. Listeners, thanks for being with us today as we talk about crafting your meaning life. You're in charge. You're not a victim. You're not just waiting for life to happen to you. You're ready to live your life to the fullest and craft your best life. And thank you for being with us today. And remember that nothing is impossible. And keep dreaming, because only when you dream can things happen. What seemed to be impossible become possible. Namaste.
Crafting a Meaningful Life.